The sky was burning with dusk when the front doors of the grand house burst open. Alina stumbled out barefoot, her thin shift dragging through the dust. Behind her, Master Darren's hand was clamped around her wrist like a shackle. "Move!" he barked, yanking her down the stone steps. She gasped, but didn't fight. She couldn't. Her body was too light now, her breath too shallow. Weeks of fever had stripped her to bone and shadow. Her once golden hair clung in wet strands to her cheek. But her eyes, those ocean gray eyes, still shimmered with silent defiance, even through the sickness. "Not there, Darren, please," she whispered, staggering as he pulled her toward the eastern path. "Not the quarters." He didn't answer, just dragged her like a broken doll toward the edge of the estate. Past the apple grove, past the barn, where the earth turned rough and the buildings turned small. The slave quarters, now half empty since the last emancipation, stood like ghosts in the amber light. One of the stable boys froze at the sight of her. A few laborious looked up from their fires. A woman dropped her pail. Darren flung Alina forward. She collapsed in the date, coughing hard. "She's no wife of mine now," he snarled to the stunned workers. "She's yours. Feed her. Wash her. Bury her. I don't care." She looked up at him, eyes wide. Her lip trembled. "Darren." He didn't look back. They say love leaves quietly. But cruelty, it echoes. The sun dipped behind the hills, and with it, the last warmth Alina knew. She lay in the dirt, skin burning from the fall, the weight of her husband's shame heavy as chains. A pair of boots approached. Slowly, steady, she curled tighter into herself. "I'm not here to hurt you," said a voice, deep and calm. "Can you walk?" She looked up. The man standing above her was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in rough linen. His skin was darkened by years of labor, his hands scarred. But his face, it was calm. Still, not afraid of her. Not angry. Just seeing her. "I'm Jonas," he said. She didn't answer. Didn't move. So he offered his hand. Not like Darren had, tight and controlling, but open. He led her to the smallest cabin on the far edge, where the wind hummed through the shutters. He said little, but gave her time to sit, to breathe, to be still. That night, she couldn't sleep. Not from pain. She'd grown used to that. But from the silence. The absence of her maids. Her perfume. The absence of belonging. She lay curled on a straw cot, shivering, when the door creaked. Jonas entered, holding a cup of something warm. He placed it near her feet without a word and left. Alina didn't touch it, but it made her cry. By morning, her fever returned. The sun was too bright through the wooden cracks. Her limbs wouldn't move. The world spun. She heard voices outside. Someone said she wouldn't last a week. Another wondered why Jonas took her in at all. That afternoon, she awoke to find the room cool and her sheets damp from a cloth on her forehead. Jonas was sitting by the doorway, carving a piece of wood. "You should have let me die," she whispered. He looked up. "You're not dying." She closed her eyes. "I'm not alive either." He said nothing. But that night, the fire was lit a little closer to her bed. And the next morning, warm bread sat beside her pillow. 3 days passed. She spoke less. He never pried. On the 4th, she finally sat up. Her head spun, but she reached for the bread before it went stale. Jonas watched, only for a moment, then went back to chopping firewood outside. Her hands trembled as she ate, not from weakness, but from disbelief. By the end of the week, she was walking again, slowly, holding the doorway for balance. Her hair was tied back now, her gown cleaner. Still, the others stared when she passed. "She's one of them," whispered a woman by the well. "She's his now," said another. Alina heard it all. She kept walking. At the garden patch behind the quarters, she found Jonas planting beans. The earth was rich, dark. His arms glistened with sweat. "Do you always work this hard?" she asked, her voice still brittle. He looked up, then down again. "Always." She knelt beside him, knees sinking into the soil. "Teach me," she said. That night, they sat across the fire for the first time. Not as servant and mistress, but as people. Her hands were blistered, but her face had color. Her voice had more breath. "Why are you kind to me?" she asked softly. He turned the log in the fire. "Because I know what it is to be thrown away." Alina's throat tightened. She looked into the flame. "I used to think I was strong. But I wasn't. Not really." Jonas didn't reply. But the silence between them was no longer empty. It was peace. And somewhere in the distant dak, Master Darin slept with wine on his lips. Sure, his shame was gone. But in the slave quarters, a woman once discarded began to stand again. Not by command, not by title, but by the quiet strength of a man the world had ignored. The days moved like softened echoes. Alina rose early now, before the birds stirred. She'd step outside into the gray morning air, wrap her shawl tightly around her frail shoulders, and breathe deeply. Earth, smoke, dew. It had been 2 weeks since she arrived. No longer a trembling shadow, Alina's steps had steadied. Her face, though thinner, carried the calm of someone who had nothing left to prove. She didn't speak often, but when she did, people listened. Jonas watched her transformation in silence. He never asked what happened in the big house, never spoke of Master Darin or how she came to be thrown out. His silence wasn't ignorance, it was mercy. He gave her space to forget the weight of who she had been. And in return, she gave him her presence. On the third Sunday after her arrival, the workers gathered under the olive tree for a shared meal. Alina, dressed in plain linen and sandals, sat beside the others on the ground. Some still looked at her cautiously, some with confusion, but they no longer whispered behind their hands. She peeled an apple, her fingers no longer shaking. A little girl ran past, tripped, and fell into her lap. Alina let out a startled laugh, a sound that felt strange in her own mouth. Jonas, across the gathering, looked up. He saw her smile. It caught him off guard. That night, as they sat by the fire again, Alina turned to him. "I never knew quiet could feel full," she said. Jonas shifted the kettle over the flame. "That's because silence isn't emptiness. It's space." She looked at him. He rarely spoke, but when he did, every word felt planted like a seed. The next day, Alina insisted on working the field beside Jonas. He handed her a basket, and she followed him to the slope behind the eastern fence. The sun was sharp, but the breeze carried the promise of rain. He taught her to prune the vines without harming the roots. She tried, failed, tried again, and when her fingers bled from the thorns, he offered no pity, only a cloth to bind her hand and a quiet nod that said, "Try again tomorrow." That was the difference between him and the world she came from. They saw weakness and turned away. He saw weakness and waited for strength. One evening, she found him repairing a torn satchel outside his cabin. She brought a bowl of stew, her own cooking. It wasn't good. Too much salt, not enough time. But he ate it without a word. "Why do you never ask about my past?" she asked, watching his hands move. He looked at her then, meeting her gaze. "Because I can see your present." She looked away, throat tightening. In all her years in the grand house, no one had ever said something like that to her. She began to laugh again. Not often, not loudly, but truly. With the children. With the elder women who taught her how to braid her hair differently. With the chickens that always escaped the coop. And sometimes, just sometimes, with Jonas, though his smiles were small and his laughter rare, as if each one had to be earned. One night, during a storm, she couldn't sleep. The thunder cracked like old bones. She stepped out into the rain, barefoot, soaked within seconds. Jonas was there, securing the barn door with rope. Their eyes met. She laughed, soaked and shivering, hair clinging to her face. You look like a drowned saint, he said. She blinked. That's your first joke, she whispered. He shrugged, rope still in hand. Don't get used to it. But she saw the smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. A month passed. Alina had stopped marking time by pain. Now she marked it by small joys, the taste of blackberries at dawn, the feel of clean laundry in the wind, the way Jonas always left the firewood stacked neatly by her door. Then came the letter. A rider from town. Dusty. Nervous. He handed Jonas a sealed parchment, addressed to Alina R. Wendell. Her maiden name. Her hand shook as she took it. It was from Doran. Just 6 lines. The house is cold without you. Come back. I was angry. It's done now. Don't make a fool of us both. You're still my wife. You belong here. Return by week's end. Her stomach twisted. That night, she didn't eat. She stared into the fire for hours. Jonas sat nearby, sharpening a blade, pretending not to notice. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. He wants me back. Jonas didn't react. She folded the letter. He says I belong there. A long silence. Then, softly, where do you say you belong? She looked up. Her eyes stung. I don't know anymore. That night, she dreamt of her old room. Velvet drapes. Perfume bottles. A golden mirror. Everything cold, perfect, untouched. She awoke sweating. But she wasn't in that room anymore. She was wrapped in coarse wool, the scent of firewood and earth in her nose. Outside, roosters called. A pot clinked on a distant stove. It wasn't wealth. It was peace. 3 days later, Jonas found her sitting by the brook. She didn't turn as he approached. I've decided, she said. His heart stopped. I'm not going back. The wind rustled the tall grass. Birds lifted into the sky. Jonas sat beside her, silent. I think I was dead long before the fever, she whispered. I just didn't know it. He looked at her, the woman who had once collapsed in the dirt, now sitting tall beside flowing water, hair shining in the sun. I don't want to be a memory in someone's hallway, she said. I want to be alive. Here. Jonas nodded slowly. Then you are, he said. She reached out and touched his hand. And for the first time, he didn't flinch. The letter lay folded beneath her mattress. Alina didn't burn it. Not out of hope, but as a reminder of what she'd left behind. Darren's words were like the scent of an old perfume, lingering, familiar, but hollow. She no longer trembled when she thought of him. She simply felt tired, as if remembering someone else's life. She now spent her days outdoors, sleeves rolled, hands in soil, tending the land beside Jonas. The others no longer watched her with suspicion. She had become one of them. Not through words, through sweat, through showing up each morning when the frost still kissed the grass, through washing her own linens, through standing her ground when a runaway cow nearly trampled the corn rows. Jonas had seen it all, said little, but something in his gaze had changed. He no longer looked at her like someone he needed to help. Now, he looked at her like someone who had chosen to stay. One morning, she found a carved wooden trinket beside her door, a small sparrow with wings outstretched, polished smooth. She picked it up slowly, running her thumb across the grain. Jonas was already at the eastern slope, hoeing rows for the late crop. She walked toward him, sunlight warming the back of her neck. You left something, she said. He didn't look up, just kept working. I didn't sign it. She smiled. I recognized the silence. He stopped, straightened. Their eyes met. I carved birds when I was a boy, he said. Before all of this. You were good, she said, holding the sparrow to her chest. For a moment, the morning stood still. Then he returned to work, but slower, his shoulders looser, the soil softer beneath their feet. That night, as the fire crackled, Alina sat across from him with a bowl of sliced peaches. Tell me something true, she said. He raised a brow. About yourself. Not your work. He took a long breath, stared into the flames. I've never been in love. Alina blinked. He didn't say it with sadness. Just honesty. No one ever gave me the time to be, he added. She looked down at her hands. I was loved once. Or maybe just admired. It felt like love when the parties were loud and the dresses were new. She looked up, eyes gleaming. But no one ever sat beside me and listened to my silence. Jonas didn't respond. But she could see it in his eyes. He understood. 3 days later, Darren returned. The thundering of hooves broke the calm of morning. He came not alone, but with 2 guards and a carriage, polished, black, foreign against the earth-stained cabins. Alina had been in the herb garden when she saw them. She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. Darren stepped out first. His face was leaner, his eyes sharp, sweeping the field like he still owned every inch of it. Then he saw her. Alina, he called, spreading his arms as if to welcome her into an embrace. She didn't move. The guards exchanged glances. I gave you time, Darren said, stepping closer. Now come. I've prepared your chambers. And your dresses. You'll be well again. She looked at him. Really looked. And saw only a man who loved how she looked at his side, not who she was. I'm not coming, she said simply. He blinked. A laugh escaped him. You're not serious. She stood taller. I am. You're my wife. I was your ornament. Darren's expression darkened. This place has poisoned you. Behind her, a few workers gathered, silent, tense. Jonas stood still, shovel in hand. You don't belong here, Darren said. With them. I didn't belong with you, she replied. The wind stirred her hair. The sun caught the sweat on her brow. Her apron was dirty, her hands rough, but her voice was clear. Strong. Darren stepped closer. You've forgotten who you are. No, she said. For the first time, I remember. He looked past her. To Jonas. To the men and women who now stood by their cabins, arms folded, backs straight. The estate wasn't his anymore, not like it had been. This place had shifted, not in ownership, but in soul. Darren's mouth tightened. You'll regret this, he said. She didn't blink. I already regret waiting so long. He stared at her, the woman he had once dressed in gold, who now stood before him with doubt on her hem and defiance in her spine. He turned without another word, got back in the carriage. The horses snorted, and then he was gone. That night, the fire was lit earlier than usual. Alina sat across from Jonas, the small carved sparrow in her lap. She turned it slowly between her fingers. I think I loved the idea of love, she said. The way people talked about it. The way it sounded in stories. Jonas didn't speak. But it was never soft like this. Never quiet. Never slow. She met his eyes. It never gave me room to breathe. He set down the small blade he was sharpening, then reached across the fire. Not fast. Not claiming. Just offering. She placed her hand in his. Fingers tangled. A silence passed between them. Not empty. Full. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder. The stars blinked overhead. The crickets sang. Somewhere far off, an owl called. But in that small cabin yard, where once shame had been thrown like scraps, love, finally, had a place to land. The days that followed were calm in the way rivers are calm, steady, but always moving. Alina and Jonas no longer spoke in long sentences. Their silences were full enough. A nod in the morning meant shared work. A half-smile in the evening meant the fire would be lit early. She started sleeping without fear, waking without dread. The scars of her past didn't vanish, but they softened. And when they ached, Jonas never tried to fix them. He simply stayed. Summer reached its height. The days were longer, the sun more golden. Crops began to swell, and Alina began to laugh again, openly now, without guilt. The children of the quarters would run through the fields and loop around her legs. They had stopped being afraid of her long ago. Now they loved her, because she knelt when she talked to them, and always remembered their names. One morning, she was mending a fence when one of the older women approached. Her name was Marie. Wrinkled hands, kind eyes, always watching. Marie stood beside her a long while in silence, then said, "You found your home." Alina looked at her. "I didn't mean to." "None of us did," Marie said. "But the earth doesn't care how you arrive, only how you stand." She walked away before Alina could respond, but the words stayed rooted in her heart like seeds. That night, she brought Jonas a bowl of stew and lingered by the fire. "Did you always want this life?" she asked him. He thought for a moment. "Not always. And now? I want what stays." She looked at him, quietly stunned. He didn't mean land or power or titles. He meant peace, roots, a life that didn't disappear when someone looked away. Later that evening, she brought out the little sparrow he had carved. She placed it between them on the wooden table. "I never asked, why a bird?" He didn't answer at first. Then, because birds remember how to leave, even after cages. She swallowed. The fire crackled. "Do you think I've left the cage?" Jonas met her eyes. "No. I think you've started to fly." And still, the wind changed. On the 15th day after Darren's return, a new messenger arrived. This time, it was not a letter. It was a summons, signed by the city magistrate, stamped with Darren's crest, a formal request for Alina to return to the estate as his legal wife, or face a formal complaint of abandonment and marital disobedience. Jonas read it in silence, then handed it to her. She stared at it for a long time. This wasn't just a plea from a bitter man. It was war. That night, she didn't speak. She walked alone to the edge of the woods and sat on the stone ledge where the field met the trees. Jonas found her there much later. "You're not afraid of him," he said gently, sitting beside her. "No," she said. "I'm afraid of the law that still lets him reach me." Jonas nodded. They both knew what power Darren held in the city, what whispers he could create, what rumors he could buy. "But I won't go," she said firmly. Jonas looked at her. "You don't have to run anymore," he said. "But you don't have to fight alone either." In the following days, whispers spread. People from the nearby farms came to see Alina. Word had traveled, not of scandal, but of dignity, of a woman discarded and reborn. Some came just to look at her, like they might catch courage from her presence. Others brought offerings, bread, fruit, even flowers. The quarter changed. It no longer felt like the bottom rung of a forgotten world. It felt like a place where new roots were growing. Then came the moment she had feared, but no longer dreaded. A horse arrived bearing a different kind of letter, not from Darren, but from the court. A trial was scheduled. Darren was suing to retrieve property, that was the word, left under care of the household. Jonas stood beside her as she read it. She held the letter tightly, hands steady. "He sees me as a possession," she said. Jonas didn't speak. "I won't go back," she whispered. "Not to prove anything. Not to fight. I'll go only to end it." "Then I'll go with you," Jonas said. She looked at him, startled. "You don't belong in that world." "No," he said. "But neither do you anymore. And someone should stand beside you who sees you for who you are." They left 3 mornings later. Alina wore no jewelry, no silk, only a simple blue dress and boots caked in soil. Jonas rode beside her on a borrowed horse. They said little on the road, but their presence beside one another said everything. When they reached the court in town, the crowd stared. Not because of her clothes or his skin or the strangeness of their pairing, but because of the way she stood, straight, calm, rooted. The way he walked, protective, sure, silent. Darren sat inside already, surrounded by advisors and dressed in velvet. He smirked when he saw her. Then his eyes flicked to Jonas. And for the first time in years, he looked unsure. As they waited for the magistrate, Alina turned to Jonas. "If they ask why I stayed," she said softly, "what should I say?" He looked at her. "Tell them the truth." "What is it?" "That I didn't save you." She frowned. "What do you mean?" Jonas smiled. "You saved yourself. I just stayed long enough to witness it." The courtroom was a grand space, polished oak benches, velvet banners, and the heavy smell of power. Alina had once stood in rooms like this wearing perfume and silk, praised for her husband's status. Now she stood with dirt under her nails, her spine straighter than ever. Darren sat to the left of the magistrate's podium, flanked by two advisors in grey coats. He looked polished, cold, sure. Jonas stood behind Alina, not as a protector, but as a presence. She didn't need protection anymore. She needed only to be seen. The magistrate entered, a tall man with graying hair and distant eyes. He took his seat, shuffled papers, and called the hearing to order. "Master Darren Wendell," he began, "has filed a formal claim regarding his wife, Alina Wendell, who has, in his words, abandoned her marital duties and is residing unlawfully on Labor grounds." The words hit like cold iron. Alina did not flinch. The magistrate turned to her. "Lady Wendell, you are permitted to speak." She stepped forward, her voice clay. "I am no longer Lady Wendell," she said. "I stand here as myself." The courtroom rustled. "I was discarded, thrown to the quarters like refuse. Not out of law, but out of pride. I was ill, and instead of care, I received shame." Darren shifted, his mouth tightening. "You were given shelter," he interrupted. The magistrate held up a hand. "You will speak when permitted." Alina continued. "I was given to a man Master Wendell believed beneath him. A slave in name, a servant in status. But that man treated me with more dignity than my husband ever did." The room held its breath. "I did not run away," she said. "I was abandoned. I did not disobey. I survived." Darren rose. "She's confused by hardship," he said. "These past months have disoriented her. I came in mercy, not malice. She is still my wife, and I have a legal right to bring her home." He turned to Alina. "Come back," he said. "We can forget this ugliness." Alina stepped back slightly. "I've already forgotten what you call home." Darren's eyes flicked to Jonas. "This is about him, isn't it?" Alina shook her head. "This is about me." The magistrate cleared his throat. "By the laws of this land, a husband cannot legally discard a wife without grounds. Nor can he forcibly reclaim her after doing so, unless it is proven she left of her own will." He looked at Jonas. "You were the man she was given to. Is that correct?" Jonas stepped forward, calm and unwavering. "Yes." "Did you force her to stay?" "No." "Did you ask her to?" "No." "Did you ever treat her as property?" Jonas looked directly at the magistrate. "No. I treated her as a person." The magistrate paused and wrote something down. Alina spoke again. "In the quarters, I learned how to live again. I learned how to wake, how to stand, how to love without fear." A soft gasp moved through the crowd. "Yes," she said. "I love him. Not because he saved me, but because he saw me." Darren's face twisted. "You'll regret this," he muttered. Alina turned fully to face him now. No fear, no hesitation. "I already did. For too many years. But not anymore." The magistrate looked over the papers, then to both parties. "In the eyes of this court, Alina Wendell is not to be treated as property. She was cast out without legal basis. Therefore, she is free to choose where she resides and with whom." A pause. The court will not support a forced return to a husband who abandoned his vows. Darren stood in disbelief. You can't be serious. But the room was already shifting. The magistrate struck the gavel. This case is closed. Outside the courthouse, the day was bright. The kind of brightness that made things feel cleaner than they were. A few curious townsfolk lingered, whispering behind their hands. But Alina didn't hear them. She stood on the steps, wind pressing against her sleeves. Jonas walked down beside her, silent. You didn't speak much in there, she said, glancing sideways. I didn't need to. She smiled. They walked to the horses, untied the reins. But before mounting, she stopped, turned to him. I meant what I said. In there. Jonas looked at her, his eyes soft. So did I. She touched his hand, gently, reverently. I don't want a house with chandeliers anymore, she whispered. I want a home where no one raises their voice to be heard. Then let's build it, he said. They returned to the land, not just to the quarters, but beyond, a plot of soil near the woods, where wildflowers grew thick and the stream ran clear. The others helped them. The old women baked, the children gathered stones. Jonas carved the beams by hand. Alina painted the shutters sky blue. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. Seasons passed. Alina's hair grew long again. Her cheeks were no longer hollow. The small lines on her face did not come from pain, but laughter. She rose early every morning, not to please a master, but to tend the garden. She kissed Jonas by the well. They held hands without fear. And some evenings, she would sit by the firelight, holding the carved sparrow in her hand, remembering the night he gave it to her. You know, she once told him, you taught me the meaning of strength. He had smiled gently. No, he said, you taught yourself that. I just stayed long enough to watch you remember. They grew old with quiet love. No grand declarations. No gold. But roots. Deep and strong. And every time the wind passed through the trees, Alina would close her eyes and remember who she had once been. Fragile, forgotten, discarded. And who she had become. A woman no longer owned, but free.